Hey guys, hope you're doing well. In today's video, we will learn together how to write unit tests for a Django Viewset. In one of the latest videos, we learned together how to write a viewset in Django. We see the benefits of using viewsets in Django and how they are easy to develop a REST API. In today's video, we will learn how to write unit tests for that viewset to make sure all the methods we have there, all the basic methods, create, read, update, delete, and even retrieve, work as intended. In order for that to happen, we need a package called REST framework, and we need a class as well for providing the functionalities we need to test this REST API. So we will need from REST framework package a class called API test case. So let's import this first. From REST framework .test import API test case. So now let's create our class and let's call this, since we are going to test the viewset we created earlier for post application. So let's call this test post view test case. That will be better. So post view test case, and let's add the class here. We need this class to be able to use the methods that provide for us to be able to make API endpoint or API request to our API, right? So API test case here is going to be called in this class. So let's set up our fake test database, and to do this, as always, we'll use setup function, and then we can create one user, one author for the post. So in order to do that, let's say self.author, that will be a variable, and then let's call custom user. So I need to import this first. So let's say from users dot models import custom user. So now let's create a user object. So using the create user function that we already have in our custom user model, and let's start adding or put in some arguments here that the create user accepts. So the first thing is the username, so let's put this test user, and then we have the email. Let's put this let's assign this to test user at e.com, and then let's come up with a fake password here, but let's put this one here. It's already generated. Thank you. Now we created an author. What we need to do next, we need to authenticate this author using something comes from API test case class. So we will be using a function called client. This method here is going to have another method for authenticating users. So this is called force authenticate. Force authenticate accepts one argument called user. This argument will be assigned to the author we just created here. So let's assign this argument to self-author. Nice. So now our user is authenticated. So if we run the unit test now, since we have no unit test at all, but this is going to authenticate the user with those credentials. Now let's get started setting up another data, but this data for the post model. So we will need to call it here in order to create at least one post and use it for testing. So let's import first from models import post. So we have this in our own application, and the post model accepts two fields or three except alter, title, and description. And of course, created ads and updated ads are generated automatically by Django. So let's go back to test.py and let's create. So let me just add one more comment here to say create or set up test account and authenticate the user, the test account, and yeah, now let's create post or test post. So just to make things more clear for you guys. Okay, so now let's create this and let's call this post. Since we are going to create only one post here, it's okay to say just one post without putting one, but it's okay. So let's call this model here and say post object create, and remember we are calling create method. So let's put in some arguments here that post model accepts. So we have alter. So let's put this or assign this to self.alter, and we have the title of the post. So we can just say my first, okay, let's put this in the case, my first post. And let's add a description as well for the post. So I'm sorry, my first post description. Great. So we now created a new post or test post object that we can use in our testing. So now our database is implemented. So let's start writing our first unit test here. And this unit test will be for testing the query set of an authenticated user. So we want to make sure if the authenticated user is going to get the list of the objects we have in database. So we just created one object here, and we should expect that when someone authenticates with right credentials, they should get, you know, a list of post object instances in get request, of course. So let's do that now. So let's start writing our first unit test, and let's call this get query set authenticated user. So that will accept self argument as always, and so I don't want to have any space here. Great. So we want to make a get request, and in order to make a get request, we will need again self.client from API test case to be able to make this request. So let's call this self.get. But before we make this request, but anyway, just to not get you frustrated here, so let's say self.client get request, right? So here it should accept a URL, and we don't have any URL yet. So let's create a variable here called URL, and let's create, or let's assign this to the URL of the get or method or get endpoint of our REST API. So if you remember, we are using in our viewset post as a base name, and normally viewset is going to use that post or that base name value and follow it by the name that viewset is using automatically, which is list. Just this one for get request. If you have a delete request, you will get detail, and the same as well for put endpoint and yes, sorry, it's similar to update endpoint. So you have update and delete and retrieve for they use, you know, for example, we have a base name called post. We will have, you know, the name of the template is, or the name of the router is post detail. But if you are going to get or make a get request, you'll get post list. So this is always based on your own base name that you set to your router. So the URL here, it will accept that router, so that takes list because we are going to make a GET request. So we will be using here reverse method, and everyone knows reverse method in Django and what it does. So let me import this from Django first. So from Django.urls import reverse, and I need it here to be able to get the URL of my router, so endpoint. So going here to say post and list. Since we have a GET request, we'll use list here. Later, we'll be using update, delete, retrieve endpoints, and this will be replaced with the detail instead, right? Okay, so now we have the URL here. So let's put this inside GET request or GET method here, and then we can assign this to a new variable called response, for example. And here, since the user is authenticated, we should get a value or an error, sorry, a code, or what call this, status code, assign it to 200, which means it's okay or a successful, request, right? Let's do this. So let's run self assert call here, and let's compare the response status code with the expected status code. So the expected status code is status. So I'm not importing status yet, but let's just call this first here, 200, okay. Okay, so I need to import status from REST framework. So let's say from REST framework, import status. Nice. So now our endpoints here. So let me just run this unit test first to make sure everything is working before I move to the next step. So here in my terminal, I can just run python manage.py test post, since the application called post, or post exactly. Right, so here we have an error that said custom. Oh yes, I forget to assign this to object. I'm sorry here. And let's run this test again. Great, so our test here is successful. It means we are getting exactly, a successful response from our API. So now, to make sure everything is working, that we get exactly the data we want, we have to compare the response or the data we get from our response we make here with the data we have in our database. In order to do this, let's create a new variable here called serializer, maybe serializer class, but since we are going to get the data, it's better to do this instead. And serializer data, and then we can use, or assign our object here, the self post, to our serializer we created in the last video, in one of the latest videos. So let's just go to import this from serializers, import post serializer, and here we can call our serializer here and just put this, or assign it our own post, self.post, sorry here. And then we can, since this one is going to expect a list, we should add this argument because we will get a list of objects. But also we need to put this in a list instead. If we don't, we will get an error. So now we have our serializer data, and we want to compare this with this data we would get from our response here in this unit test. So let's do self-assert equal response data, and then we will compare this with the data we have in our database to see if they match or not. So let's put just serializer data. So now let's run our test and see what will happen. Okay, so here's my terminal. Let's run the same command. Okay, we got an issue here. We have an assertion error. We have ID1, alter character, and post serializer. We got my first post. Okay, there is an assertion error, it said, and because we are not getting the actual data from our serializer here, we forget something to do, which is data. So now we can get the actual data from our serializer data variable. So we don't initiate the data from, post serializer class. So now if I run the test again, well, it works. So now the test is running successfully. Great. So this is for the query set of the authenticated user. What about someone that is not authenticated? We need also to write a unit test for this. In order to do this, let's have another unit test for that, and let's call this something like, let's use the same name, query set, but instead of using authenticated user, let's say unauthenticated user, and this will accept the same arguments here. So here the first step we need to do is to log out the user first we are authenticating with, which is the self-author. So in order to do that, very simply, you can just say self.client.logout, and this will log out the user. But remember, this test is independent and it will not log out the user, for example, in the next unit test we will write. So it means the user is still authenticated, but just for this unit test, since it's independent, it will work only for this part. Okay, so now we are logging out this user, so it's kicked out from from the system, and normally we want to get the same response here. We want to make the same request and make sure if this will prevent us to consume the API. Okay, so normally I'm going to use the same lines of code here. So the first one is the URL. So let me go to this part, and then I will use the response here, and then I can compare the response status code with the expected status code. So here normally I should say just assert call, and the response status code, since the user needs to be authenticated in order to consume the post list endpoint, needs to be authenticated, right? So normally the status code we will get here is something like forbidden, 403 or 401, and authorized, but I think forbidden is the one that we will get from our status code. And so let's put the expected status code here. So we are expecting to get 403 forbidden. So if I run this code now, or this unit test, we have no issue. That's fine. So now let's clear the terminal and run the same command. Great, it works. So if I put anything just to make sure things is working, so let me put here an authorized, just to show you guys, right? Great, because you will see an assertion error set, so it means everything works right now. Great. So this is for the second unit test. So to test the query set or the prevention for that will work only for the unauthenticated user. Anyway, so here we don't need to compare as well the data, since this endpoint is forbidden and the user is unauthenticated, so they will not get access to this endpoint. Anyway, so now let's get into the third unit test, and now I think it's time to start testing the CRUD operations to make sure if our posts are created and assign it to users, and also to make sure that update, delete methods work as intended. So let's start first with create method, and let's call this create post, since we have a post here, right? So this will accept, as always, self argument. And now let's make the same kind of process we made for the first two unit tests. So the first thing we need to do is to have a URL, and this time we want to use a different URL because, or normally we will use the same one. So reverse, because we are still going to use this router and this URL in general to create an endpoint. So let's keep it the same as always, post list, but we will have a different request, and this time is self.client.post, and this will take the URL, but we need something else. We need the data we are going to post to the URL. For that reason, we have to create another variable called data, for example, and data here, it will accept, as always, a dictionary, and I hate double quotes. Anyway, so let's call this, normally we want to create a new post, so we don't need author because we are already authenticated, and in the last video we learned how to customize the view set so that you can make it secure when it comes to author, so other users cannot create posts with other authors. So now our view set is only accepting two fields, which is title and description. So here the title will take something like my second post, and we also have the description, my second post description. Okay, so now we can assign this dictionary here. And now after we made this, let's go to test, the endpoint, the response we will get from this expected, or from this implemented code here with the response that we need to expect. So normally the status code that we need to expect here is 201 created, since we are using a post request. So here will be response status code. So that, what should I get? And now let's compare this with the expected output or expected status code, which is HTTP 200 created. So let's test that and make sure it works. Let's run the same command. Oops, we got an issue here. Okay, so here they said module REST framework dot status has no attributes for 101 forbidden. Oh, I forget to put this here. Sorry guys. Normally 401 is for unauthorized, but just when I rename this, replace that with unauthorized, I forget to modify this as well. Anyway, so let's go to python manage.py test post. Make sure our test running. Great, they run successfully now. And now let's compare because we still need to make sure if the post is created by this author we set, in our fake test database. So in order to do this, we have to compare this now. So let's first create, something like post, maybe a variable here, and we want this variable to be used in order to retrieve, a title of the newly created post, which is my second post. So we can use post object get, and let's get this by title, and our title here, my second post. So we can just say data.title. By the way, I love typing. Great, and now let's compare the value we'll get from this with the value that we already set from this. So normally here the post author should be, okay, let's compare first our author to be, yeah, we want to do this. We want to make sure if that post we have now in our database is created by the same author we set for this test data. So here this is going to be our expected data, the actual data or the actual output with, and now we can compare this with the expected output that we should expect. So post dot author. So now if I do run the test, okay, we only have 3 tests. Yeah, that's okay. That works awesome. And it means our create post works as intended. That's great. So now let's go ahead and make another unit test, but this time for retrieve endpoint. So retrieve endpoint is really important because it's the one that we use for updating a post or updating data or deleting something, right? So let's have this unit test here. So let's call this, or let's follow the same template, retrieve task. Take self, and now we want to make the same process here before, but here instead of using post list, we'll be using post detail because we are going to retrieve this time and not getting, stuff data, right? So let's have a URL variable as always, and then we can say reverse and then post detail. Sorry for that. Okay, so post detail is going to be really important here, but there is something that we need to do first, and this thing is an argument that we need to add to reverse. This argument will help us get the exact, post we want based on the ID. In order to do that, we need just to open up args here, and then we can say anything we want. So maybe a primary key, self, or maybe this one, sorry for that, self dot post dot, just here's primary or pike key or ID, both will work. So now we can just go to the response, and we want to generate our response, and the response we will have here, since not going to make any kind of code or something, so we don't need to push any data because we want just to retrieve. So let's say response, call this client, and this time we'll use get because we want to get a specific post, and let's put our URL here. That's it. And now let's compare the response status code. As always, self assert call and response status code with the expected output, which is the 200 OK. So we can, as always, from HTTP 200 OK. Nice. So now let's make sure this is exactly what we want. So let's go to run the same command. So now we have for test. That works great. So now let's make sure we have the exact kind of data. So here we can make this logic very similar to the one we used in get query set authenticated user unit test. So instead of having one post this or multiple posts this time, we want just one single post. So we'll be using the same line here, and we'll copy and paste that in line 55. And since we have post serializer here, and since we are going to retrieve only one post, we don't need to use many arguments here, and also we don't need to put this in a list. Just put it here, just because this will expect just one object instance. So now we can compare, or we can compare, yes, the response data with the serializer data to make sure this endpoint retrieve is working as expected. So let's say self-assert equal, and then we can say response.data, and then with serializer.data, sorry, underscore data. Oh, what's going on here? Okay, so now let's go back to terminal and run the same command, py test, and our test runs successfully. So now we get rid of retrieve task, we create post, get query stat. So we have here 4 unit tests. So maybe we need to add 1 or 2 more unit tests, one for the update and one for delete. So let's start with the update one here, and let's call this update task, and it will accept always self argument. And we'll be using the same URL here because we are going to retrieve a specific post, and also with according to his ID, right? And sorry, according to their ID, right? And then we are going to use response because we want to, but yes, we will use the response. So let's put this here. But as you know, we will update a single post here. So we need to have another variable to store the data by which we can use to update that single post. So let's have another variable here called post, and let's import, let's the titles and description. Nice. So for this, let's see, we want to update post 1 as always. So this is the one that we want to update since we have only one post. And let's call this my updated first, or let's say my first, okay, this is called my first post, my first updated post. Maybe that, okay, let's keep it like this. I hate that title. My first updated description. Nice. So we update the title and the description of this. So let's send this data with this request, but also we need to change here the get method to put to update, the data here. So normally here we need to make sure how the response. So normally the response that we will get with the actual implementation is 200, okay, and that's what we need to expect. So we need to compare this with the expected output, which is 200, okay. So let's run self-assert equal, and let's say response.data, and then we can say again, here's status code. I don't know why I'm saying data. And then we can go ahead with status HTTP 200, okay. Right. And now let's oh, I don't know what's going on here. Maybe I indent that too much. Okay, so let's run this. I'm going back terminal a lot of times. So we have 5 tests now. Oops, my so is running successfully. That's great. So let me just plug in my device, guys, and wait. I don't know how to get this. That's great. So we have 5 tests running successfully. So let's make sure everything is updated here by comparing this one of their values that we update with the current data we have in our database or fake test database. To do this, let's put another variable here called post, and what we want just to say post, let's say just get this with the ID, and then we can compare both values together. So we can just say post object get, let's get this by primary key or PK or ID. They would work both. And let's say self dot alter, maybe self dot post, sorry, type key, just ID here. And now let's compare again. I'm using article a lot. That's normal. That's the only choice I have, just for us to make a very simple unit test and understand together how to do this for a Viewset in a Django application. So we want to compare here the title that we updated, which is my first updated post. So that the value that we want to expect with the one that we have in our current test database, just post.title, right? And now if because we try to retrieve now the data by the ID of the post, so we should expect to have the same value that we used to update. Okay, so let's just run this again. Hope that runs successfully. Nice, that works great. So now we have update, we have retrieve, create, and other unit tests for testing via an authorized, or an authenticated user and authenticated user query sets. So now one more test we can add here is for delete, since delete is really important. So let's call this test. Okay, so guys, let me just go like this. And let's call this delete post, and we accept the same argument. So we'll be using the same line of code here, the URL to get the URL of the post, and we don't need data. We want just a single post and delete it. So we'll use this, but instead of using put, we will use delete without the data particle. We are already getting that post from this ID, right? So now let's compare the response. So the response should be 204, which is, I think, no content. Yeah, let's try this out and let's compare the response we will get with the response of the status code, status, and oh, I don't have it here. Interesting. So now let's see, just HTTP, I think it's 200 for no content. I hope I'm wrong. Okay, let's compare that. And let's see if I'm wrong or not. I have success now. Woo! Great, I'm right. And now let's make sure that test is deleted from our database by just saying self assert, or just we can yeah, I think we can run this immediately from okay, so we will use here self-assert false, right? And instead of equal, we will use false because we want to make sure if this is created or not, or is, still exists in our database or not. So in order to do this, we can just have post object, and then we can use filter method. And what we want to get this using ID or PK. So let's say just self post PK, and then we can have another method here called exists to make sure we get false here. We shouldn't get true, we should get false. And now if I didn't say that yet, so let's see. Text test here. Nice, that works great. So hope you can find, guys, this tutorial on how to write unit tests for a view set in Django helpful. I hope this can give you a little or a basic idea on how to do so. Of course, we have complicated projects and we will test more, complicated things, but this, trust me guys, is the basic foundation of how to write a unit test for a view set in Django. So it will be very helpful if you follow the same template, or you can follow the documentation as well. It has more stuff you can learn, you can use to test more your endpoints. And I hope you find it useful and give you at least a general idea how this works and how a view set in Django is tested. That being said, that's all for this video. Hope guys find it helpful, and see you in the next tutorial. Bye for now.